those of us in Never Trump have always known and always said that Donald Trump had no chance of winning the 2016 general election, even if Hillary Clinton was the Democrat nominee. But there were others who were willing to give him a shot, game it out. Because, of course, as I certainly have also long said, Hillary Clinton is the worst national presidential candidate, major party presidential candidate of the modern era, certainly, maybe in American political history. Except for Donald Trump, of course. But, so I mean, when you had the two weakest candidates in the respective parties winning the nomination, I suppose in those circumstances, even Trump could at least theoretically be said to have had a chance. In other words, it's one of those things where I don't agree with it, but I can understand it, which is all the more humorous because now even those who were willing to give Trump a chance, or in terms of his chances of winning in November, are now coming around to where we in Never Trump have been all along. One of them was Brandon Finnegan, and he calls it, shall we say, at nationalreview.com today. The chance was there, Finnegan begins, but Trump has squandered it. Of course he has. Which is another way of saying there never was any chance of Trump winning in November. Now, Donald Trump's presidential campaign slogs on. Well, slogs, rages, lurches. Pick your adjective. But he has effectively blown his chances at getting it into 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue as anything other than a tourist. By failing to pivot through his convention, by failing to build a ground team in important states, by failing to reassure voters uneasy with his primary rhetoric, in other words, by refusing to run an actual presidential campaign, Trump has killed his campaign. Suicide, you might say, because, of course, his objective was always more about taking over the Republican Party and killing any chance of Hillary Clinton not becoming the next president of the United States. In other words, Trump accomplished what he set out to accomplish last month. Everything else is just, well, whatever. He's done what he set out to do. The result has been that his numbers with college-educated voters and blacks have dropped dramatically, effectively locking him out of states such as Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, states he had to win if he was actually going to become president, and he's not even trying. How do you not see this, Trump supporters? And how is it any of our fault? Us, Never Trump, that little teeny tiny irrelevant dead, I think is what Trump himself called it. And yeah, somehow it's all our fault. Make up your minds. Again, these two assertions don't go together. Or these two excuses. Now, this piece could be rather short. Indeed, I could simply say what most analysts think, but are careful not to admit loudly for fear of being proven wrong. Trump, at this rate, isn't going to be president. Well, I'll come right out and say it. I've been saying it for over a year. Instead, I will try to explain why, which, in short, is that he has no credible path. And, of course, he never did. At one time, it looked as if Trump could make it to the White House through Pennsylvania. But now, however, his numbers in that state are plummeting. That Clinton bounce we heard so much about after the Democrat convention, it's now a sustained gap. And it threatens to swallow most, if not all, of the endangered down-ballot seats. I mean, nobody, no Republican who has bent the knee to Donald Trump is going to gain anything from having done so. You realize that, Trump supporters? You realize what you have cost your party? You have any idea? You're gonna. And it won't be our fault. On the face of it, Pennsylvania is not the be-all and end-all. I mean, after all, Trump technically, hypothetically, theoretically could still win by collecting a combination of Nevada, Iowa, Wisconsin, and or New Hampshire. In truth, though, that avenue seems less likely by the day. Hillary Clinton has been relatively weak in Iowa and Nevada, and the high percentage of no-college whites in each gives Trump at least a fighting chance, though he still trails in both state averages. But his atrocious numbers in Wisconsin and New Hampshire almost certainly rule out his achieving the quartet. He has, in short, nowhere to go. It didn't have to be this way. Indeed, Trump had a narrow window to get on a competitive footing and to keep the race close throughout the fall. But as you can see from the data, that window has all but closed on him, with Mrs. Clinton's advantages in Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin widening right along with her national lead, which is now 7 percentage points currently in the RCP average. Now ask yourself a question. What presidential candidate, not the incumbent, non-incumbent, was polling this badly within the 90-day election window and then went on to win the presidency? If you're having trouble coming up with an answer, that's because there hasn't ever been one. Ever. Now, whatever he might say, fraud will not cost Donald Trump this race. That this even has to be said shows the levels of paranoia and disconnect from reality some Republicans have sunk into over the last few years. I came close to sinking into it, but I didn't quite completely submerge. What I always said about voter fraud is it's not enough to explain, as with last time, the Obama-Romney race in 2012, a 5 million vote popular vote margin. I mean, voter fraud is at the edges, at the margins, and there can't possibly be that much of it. But if it were true, well, if it works, then guess who's in charge of investigating and prosecuting the voter fraud? Those who benefited from it. You know the old saying, history is written by the winners? Well, there you go. So I never thought it made any sense to dwell on it, because it's not something that by definition we, the ones who were damaged by the voter fraud, could ever prove. And if you can't prove it, what's the sense in continuing to harp upon it? Besides that, it's another form of excuse making. Whether or not the excuse is true or not, it's still excuse making, and that can develop bad habits which now are not serving Trumplicans well. I mean, there was a mini conspiracy going around about why 57 wards in Philadelphia cast no votes in 2012 for Mitt Romney. But consider that those wards were 99% African American precincts with next to 0 registered Republicans. Also consider that if you were to negate those 57 wards, discount every one of their ballots, Mitt Romney would still have lost Pennsylvania by more than 290,000 votes. See what I mean? Likewise, even had Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cleveland, and Detroit been sunk into Earth's mantle before November 2012, Romney would still have lost Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. His loss margins in all these cities were smaller than his statewide loss. It wasn't fraud that cost Mitt Romney a victory. It was an incumbent president with a superior campaign. Now, we might start seeing the, well, anyone would have lost to Hillary, which is definitely not something I'm going to say, because we and Never Trump know better. We might start seeing the, well, anyone would have lost to Hillary historical rewrites before the first election night numbers even roll in, and I'm going to stop you right there before you walk down that silly-ass road. John Kasich, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Scott Walker, Ben Carson, Chris Christie, and yes, Ted Cruz all polled better against Hillary Clinton than did Donald Trump. Any actual Republican polled better against Hillary Clinton than did Donald Trump. If you set out to cost the Republican Party the 2016 presidential election, you could not have done any better than to nominate Donald Trump. I mean, John Kasich had a 16-point margin lead in Pennsylvania in a survey that put Trump 3 points underwater. And I understand John Kasich, rhino, obnoxiously rhino, better than Trump, because Kasich, for whatever else you could say about him, is actually a Republican. What does it say about Trump that Kasich is better than he is? But Trump's not a Republican, is he? Even as we approach the end of the grueling primary season, John Kasich had better favorability ratings than either Trump or Mrs. Clinton. I mean, the favorability of a battered Ted Cruz was still marginally better than Trump's. And throughout the whole process, the eventual nominee would consistently sport the worst favorability ratings. I was pointing this out 6 months ago. And I wasn't the only one, God knows. Nobody wanted to listen. Because it wasn't about winning in November for Trumplicans. It wasn't about stopping Hillary. Oh my God, Hillary! It wasn't about that. It was about burning down the GOP. That's what it was. This was about fratricidal revenge. It was not about winning, and it was not about stopping the Democrats. Which, in the end, is all the Tea Party ever really ultimately wound up being about. What they ultimately wound up standing for. In very recent days, Donald Trump has started what some are calling the latest pivot. He has even admitted outright that he sometimes chooses the wrong words. As we talked about yesterday, well, so much for that. He was often insulting again yesterday. Considering the consistent resistance to any significant change in his strategy, that was an improvement that, just like all the others, didn't last for long and wasn't real. But he is now losing college-educated white voters, which exist in high concentrations in the Philadelphia collar, so to speak. He's polling at 2% or worse among African-American voters, and he needs 5 times that to have a shot at blunting margins in Philadelphia. And his numbers with white men in very recent polls have begun to fade as well. White men. That last part is important. White males without a college degree are Trump's bedrock bloc. Losing ground with males overall implies that this bloc might have begun to have doubts as well. Pity that couldn't have happened like 3 months ago or 4 months ago, but c'est la vie. His task in winning Pennsylvania was to remake himself for the final stretch, posing himself as a pragmatist who has a stronger ear for the economically stressed than Hillary Clinton has. Yeah, a guy who was born into a fortune with a real estate fortune with a silver spoon in his mouth. Yeah, he knows all about, never worked an honest day in his life. Yeah, he knows all about having a stronger ear for the economically stressed than Hillary Clinton has. Well, I don't know. They're kind of neck and neck in that sense. She's never worked an honest day in her life either. And one whom suburban voters could trust with their vote. But the prolonged kerfuffle. Paranoid statements about U.S. intelligence and ranting about rigged elections aren't confidence boosters. Not very presidential, I guess you could say. And his numbers have sunk over the last month or so. He has barely begun spending anything significant on ads, and as BuzzFeed outlined, his on-the-ground presence is still virtually non-existent. Republicans could take full advantage of online voter registration and expand on their 2016 gains, or could have, but not if there isn't a voter structure or volunteer structure set up to identify, contact, and sign up potential voters. Primary voters foolishly gambled. Yeah, really, it wasn't much of a gamble. Gambling implies that there's a chance. I mean, this was just throwing money away, metaphorically speaking, with an outsider who promised to shake things up and run a campaign that would be radically different from anything seen before, which is precisely why he's losing so badly. The blueprint for winning Pennsylvania or anywhere else, and certainly the general election, was always there. He just chose not to use it. And yeah, we're going to know very shortly whether he's actually bothering to give it a look, because he's not, and he never could have, because that would have required Trump to stop being Trump.